Shall we start? Jerome, shall we start? Oh, good morning, everybody. Start in time, or we try to do it at least, because some of our speakers have to speak also in the following session. Good morning. My name is Nicole Bibo, and I'm leading the International Cooperation Unit of the Alfred Wegener Institute in Germany, and I'm also the coordinator of the EU PolarNet and the current chair of the European Polar Board, and in this role I am moderating the session. In the upcoming 75 minutes, we will discuss local responses to cryosphere risks. This is a really wide topic, as you can imagine, and as I learned yesterday in, for example, the permafrost session. We have to deal with responses to extraordinary pressures, with globalization and climate change combining to drive change at an unprecedented rate. The effects of the changing cryosphere are felt all over the world. They're felt by local, national, regional, and global communities, including, of course, Arctic indigenous communities, but they are also felt by industrial stakeholders, policymakers, and of course all of us. Cryosphere-related changes in floods, landslides, and water availability have the potential to lead to severe consequences for people, infrastructure, and the economy in most mountain regions. Also, with the changing cryosphere, new economic sectors, including mining and tourism, will open up alongside with the industrialization of many traditional livelihoods, such as fishing and forestry. This is driving land use conflicts between competing sectors and producing profound transformation on lives and communities at the economic, socio-cultural, political, and environmental level. We will not be able to touch about all the things I have mentioned just briefly here in our session. That's too short. And we will focus today on highlighting which are the risks the changing environment poses to research, observations, research infrastructures, and which exceptional solutions are already on the table to respond and to combat the upcoming risks related to the changing climate cryosphere. In addition to what we are showing here, it's now my duty to say that there are many ongoing projects focused on identifying, mitigating, adapting to the risks of the changing polar environment. From an EU perspective, I would like to specially mention a few projects, and you can read about these projects, if you are interested, on the EU Polar Cluster website. So the EU is currently funding projects to mitigate the risks. One of this is the AI-ARC project, which focus on innovative artificial intelligence to improve maritime safety and security. Another one is a project called Arctic Hubs, which provides research-led practices-based solutions for Arctic change. Charter develops tools with Arctic communities to better adapt to climate and biodiversity changes. And Just North aims to change the future of Arctic economic development by bringing recognition and respect to different value systems for decision-making. These are new tools. In addition, within the ocean mission of the European Commission, we are doing coastal restoration in permafrost or other affected coasts. And there's a climate rest demo site on Svalbard where the colleagues from Norway increase this resilience of the coastal ecosystem in Arctic fjords through mitigation and land-based pollution discharge and develop nature-based solution against coastal erosion. So this is already ongoing, and we will learn more here in the session. So before I give you the floor to the first speaker, could you please come and sit down here? I also would like to urge you to participate in the discussion afterwards and ask a lot of questions. We would like to hear from you what solutions you would propose to the different risks of the changing cryosphere, and we would like to hear your ideas on what we have, what we will show here in the next minutes. And then we will summarize all this input. So I'm starting now with, we are starting now with the first speaker. Will you give me a second? I need to get the first speaker of the session is Jennifer Mercer. Jennifer is the head of Arctic Science in the Office of Polar Programs of the National Science Foundation in the United States. Her prior federal service includes program director positions in both Arctic science and Antarctic research support and logistics at NSF, as well as program manager for polar engineering in the US Army Cold Regions Research and Engineering Laboratory. Jennifer is the current chair of the International Forum of Arctic Research Operators, FARO, a country membership organization with 21 members nations that promote dialogue on logistics and operational support for scientific research in the Arctic. So Jennifer will speak now on how to better understand the cryosphere risks in the Arctic and Antarctic and what science is ongoing. Jennifer, it's your duty.
Thank you, Nicole. As Nicole said, I'm going to talk about some ongoing international collaborations and the recent results that are coming out of those projects that are underway. Before I do that, though, I want to tell you a little, I'm going to start with a little bit of a story about this background picture in this slide. So this is the Greenland ice sheet, the edge of the Greenland ice sheet, if you can see it there, near Pituffik Space Base in northern Greenland. Thule Air Base was recently renamed as Pituffik Space Base. And about 10 years ago, I was doing a lot of work in this area, or 10 to 15 years ago, I was doing a lot of work in this area as we were trying to establish an overland traverse route from the edge of the ice sheet up to Summit Station for resupply. And as we were going back year after year to do this, we were seeing a lot of change. New crevasse fields were forming every single year, which was making our task impossible. And the ice edge was receding by very visible amounts every single year. And so when we first started, there was an old gravel road that you could drive right up to the edge of the ice. That part made it very easy for us, where we could drive the tractors and the vehicles up and then right onto the snow. But as we continued to work, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years in, that ice edge kept receding to the point where there was the space between the edge of the road, or the end of the road, I should say, and the edge of the ice sheet was increasing. And at this point in time, since the time I had started going there in around 2010 and now, it's many hundreds of meters, that space between the end of the road and the edge of the ice sheet. This is also very observable outside of Kangerlussuaq in central Greenland. And is, I think, significant. One anecdotal point on this is that the edge of the space base, formerly the air base, was defined by the edge of the ice sheet, but because it's receding, that was expanding the defense area, the US defense area in the space, so they've had to redefine that border for that space. Okay, and the reason I'm telling you this story is because I think there were some really important points made yesterday in some of the talks. Ole Olsvig from Greenland said in the slide on the left there that you have to be there more than once to see the changes. And Tenzing Sherpa said that you must see it to understand the gravity of the situation. And I think that's really true. There was also a comment yesterday about, and I can't recall who said it, but it was about bringing the public and the politicians and the media to see these changes that are occurring, it's really important to see it with your own eyes. And I can also speak to that. We've had cases where we have brought US politicians who were very adamant that climate change was not real to Greenland. We have shown them glaciers that have completely receded and changes, again, at Pachufik Space Base. Mosquitoes did not exist there until the early 2000s. And the military people who've been there in the time before that and the time since were able to articulate this to them. And so after they experienced these observations, we noticed changes in the way they would describe climate change back in the US. So instead of saying it's not real, they would say things like, it's happening, but we have to understand it better. And for us, that might be absurd, right? Because we know we understand it. But that's, if you think about a person going from one mindset to, that's a pretty big leap in a person's mind just from observations. So I think that's really important. Okay, as I said, I'm just going to illustrate some examples of cryosphere studies that have really exciting results coming out this year, just in the last year. And most of these are focused, they're all very US-centric, so thankfully Nicole listed some European projects before I started. And they are mostly Arctic projects, with the exception of the Thwaites Glacier project. But Antonio, my colleague Antonio, will talk more about Antarctica. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention Mosaic, which we're all familiar with, I think. This is the most comprehensive Central Arctic observation effort that has ever occurred. It occurred through all seasons, and there have been more than 150 publications coming out. That list continues to grow. And this is a collaboration between 20 nations with all of their flags there in the center of the screen. But they're learning new things about Atlantic fish in the Arctic Ocean, microbial predictors of water column oxygen, multi-scale dynamics of the thin sea ice, and on and on and on. So this is a very exciting effort that has brought us a lot of new data and information. This is you don't have to read this slide. It's I'm not going to read it to you, don't worry. But this is a US, Swedish, and German and Canadian collaboration. And this is really a summary of a lot of work that has happened on permafrost and the carbon and climate interactions here. And if you take a picture of this or look at these studies later, you'll see that it's really focused on the amount of organic carbon that is stored in Arctic permafrost and has the potential to be released given the trends that we're seeing in the interaction with the atmosphere and the ocean circulation. Okay. This is another effort that's focused, it's a US, Norwegian, and German collaboration. It's focused on understanding Arctic sea ice, atmosphere, and ocean interactions. For this particular one, I think the main graph to focus on is the central one. And this shows that the rate of sea ice decline in the Arctic changed around 2007. And that's related to this Arctic dipole pattern, which you can see in the upper right there for circulation there. And that, when that changed, when that switched to this dipole pattern, the rate of sea ice decreased. So there was less sea ice, the rate change, which you can see in the central graph there. I don't know, we don't have a pointer, do we? Does this thing point? Probably not. Okay. But you can see in the central part of the graph, and then in 2007, that rate of decrease leveled off again. If this dipole pattern switches back and forth, the authors are calling this a switchgear mechanism, then we could be looking at, again, faster decline in sea ice. This is a study that just came out this year. Okay. This is very exciting here. This is focused on understanding the ice sheet, Greenland ice sheet deglaciation. And this is these are two US-Denmark collaborations. On the left, it describes this lost ice core that was drilled during the Camp Century days in the 1960s. And it was recently rediscovered in a freezer in Denmark. and shows that this area in northern Greenland was ice-free when global temperatures were 1 to 2 degrees warmer than pre-industrial temperatures. On the right-hand side, then, this is a current effort where the researchers are drilling all the way to bedrock and collecting bedrock. They were able to achieve the first bedrock samples this year, and the analyses are happening. Lots of similar analyses that were done on the Camp Century ice core are also being done on the Prudhoe Dome ice core. I can say that the ESCRIP project in Denmark in northeast Greenland also reached bedrock this year, late in the summer. I have 2 slides, I'll hurry. Okay. I think that everyone's familiar with the Thwaites Glacier project. I want to highlight it here because it's a large international collaboration with really exciting results. We heard about it some yesterday as well, so in the interest of time, I'll just keep going here. And then this is the last project I'll highlight, which was a co-developed project between US researchers and the Greenland research community on understanding what's going to happen to the coastline around Greenland as the ice melts and the land rebounds. That will change the coastline. And so this project, again, was co-developed with the Greenland research community. It's focused on 4 different areas in Greenland, and it resulted in the first tide that we know of, the first tide gauge ever installed in Greenland. Okay. So as we go on with the presentations here and the discussion afterwards, I'll just leave you with some questions for what the next steps are, and that is, where is the science headed next? We know we're in these this large collaboration, large effort type of era, because that's what's required to answer the questions. What do we need to support those efforts in terms of infrastructure, technology, coordination, and how should we prioritize things? And I think that's it.
Thank you very much. We will first hear all the 5 talks, and then we will ask questions. So we move now to Antarctica, and our next speaker is Antonio Quesada, who is full professor at the Universidad Autónoma de Madrid. He's the manager, he has been the manager of the Spanish Scientific Polar Program and is now the executive secretary of the Spanish Polar Committee. He's the current chair of COMNAP, the Council of Manager of Antarctic Programs, and he's also participating in many committees in the Antarctic, like ATCM, and in the Arctic, like IASC. Antonio, it's your turn.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here so early in the morning. Thank you. So I have been asked to be talking about the effects of the climate change on the infrastructures. Sorry. And I will be talking mainly on the effects in Antarctica. So we all know that the climate change is already producing relevant effects on the sunny infrastructures, both in the Arctic, high mountain areas, and in Antarctica. What I will explain you is I will give you a couple of examples. Those are very minor examples, and please don't take it as important, relevant, but these are only some examples, okay? So we cannot combat the effects of ice melting on the infrastructures at short term because we have it in here. So it's something that we really need to be ready to mitigate the effects. So this is another perspective of risks, and we have to consider this as important. So one very tiny example is one field camp in Livingston Island. This is in the South Shetland Islands in Antarctica. This is a very small field camp with a few tents, a couple of melon huts, very small. So on your right-hand side, you can see that we, on that red square, what was the camp, and you see on the blue line what was the previous river that was where we were taking the water from. And this was only 6 years ago. But last year, what we found is what you have on your left-hand side. We have the change, a very relevant change on the course of the river, and that change is new. It never happened before. We are there after 25 years and never saw it before. So this is obviously because there is a change on the ground. The permafrost is melting more quickly than we expected, and in fact, the active layer is going deeper and deeper and deeper. So everything is moving there at a very fast speed. So what we are having is this very small hat. This is not very relevant in terms of money, but if you can see now we have the river just side, we can almost fish there. So it's very close from the hat. And the problem is that everything is moving, and I don't know if you can perceive the tilting of the hat. Is really getting complicated. And now, this is last year's. Now we are very, very worried because we don't know what we are going to find when we go next summer, Antarctic summer. So probably there will be no hat anymore. Maybe it will be a floating asset. So we will see what is going to happen. This is, as I told you, very minor. So, but now we need to have a plan B, just to change the situation, to find another location, more stable, and that location is going to be moving again. It's going to be soft again in a few years' time. So this is something that we cannot stop. It is coming. Okay, but it's more worrying is what we have in that small station, Gabriel de Castilla station in Deception Island. Deception Island is a volcano, active volcano in Antarctica, and what you may see that there is a kind of brownish thing by the coast, by the sea line, and that brownish thing is something that we have to invent very quickly because we identified that the climate change, the increase on the sea level and the change in the ice dynamics is just eroding the coast tremendously. So we are losing 9 meters of sea line of the coast. We are losing 9 meters in only 15 years. So our modelers told us, okay, if you don't do anything now, your station will be floating soon. So it's something important. So we had to invent something. We started with just sitting that cliff with this kind of eco building just to avoid the erosion problem in the station. This happens in many stations. This is only an example. But for instance, the Polish station, they had the same problem, and they are moving backwards the station because otherwise they will be getting killed from the hat. So it's going to be complicated. In any case, we cannot do anything on those assets. We only can be ready to change it, to keep it running and to do it properly, environmentally friendly. What we can do is to start doing things like reducing the emissions, carbon emissions, reducing and optimizing also the efforts. This is also a very small example. This is a zero energy module that we are going to set up in Antarctica. This is a zero exchange energy system that is going to be running for many years. And the principle is that it will be independent, autonomous, and it will be zero, really zero energy. So it's all the energy that is used inside. This is a small one, and this is only 60 square meters. And all the energy that is required for this module is going to be done by wind generators and by solar panels. But the most interesting thing here is that in Antarctica, there is not always sun, as you know, and there is not always wind. So what we will be is with the leftovers of the energy, because we will have leftovers, we will be producing green hydrogen. This green hydrogen will be running, will allow us to run the remote station autonomously over winter. So our modeling shows that we will have even more energy than we will need, and this is zero carbon emissions. So we will be running this year, and I will tell you perhaps in next feature how everything went. This is innovation, we don't know. But we also can do other things like optimizing our assets, trying to reduce the cost and reduce the carbon emissions that we are running our stations, our assets, in all Antarctica. And we have to wonder, should we go on with this rhythm? Do we really need to build the largest, the heaviest, and the more consuming icebreaker in the world every year, every country? Do we need to have all these ships, ultra modern, high speed, high energy? Do we need it? How many of them do we need? The global community, not only every country. Because finally what we find is this kind of things. This is Punta Arenas in Chile port, and perhaps you cannot see it, but there are 6 vessels, icebreakers, or polar vessels, waiting for days and days and days to be filled up, to be refilled. Do we need that? We have to think about that. So in COPNAP, what we have done, and this is my last slide, Nicole. In COPNAP, what we have done is an exercise just to optimize our assets. We are invented a bartering system. That bartering system, what makes is just to share the installations, just to talk. There is no big software associated. There is no big investment in people, in energy. It's only talking. With that talking system, what we got is this exchanging system, bartering system. This is a pilot program with only 5 members, 5 states working there. And what we found, just only by talking, is we saved almost $1 million in a small season, a small summer season. So it means if we increase that, it will be a lot. It will be a lot of saving. But not only money. In this case, we convert money in carbon. So I think this is very good, because with that money that we are saving, the operators can do better science farther away. So thank you very much.
So now we are moving on to observations and long-term monitoring. Our speaker is Nicolas Arnaud. He's the director of the Institute of Earth and Space Sciences at CNRS. He is the founder and former director of the Montpellier Mediterranean Environmental Research Observatory, which is dedicated to observing the Mediterranean environment and natural hazards in the context of global change. And he's also the vice president of the French Alliance for the Environment. It's your turn, Nicolas. Looking forward.
Thank you very much, and good morning to all. It is a pleasure and honor for CNRS, which is a key player for research on polar regions here, to talk to you. So I'm just waiting for the presentation to be set up. Yes, here we are. So finally, I could stick to only one slide. That would be the first one, because the key home message to take back is actually we need to enhance and support the long-term monitoring efforts in polar region. I should say in cryosphere territories as a whole. Although I will, for reasons of time, focus to specific issues in the polar regions. We know, but I think it needs to be rehearsed again and again, how much it is important to actually sustain long-term monitoring in polar research as a whole, and I should say cryosphere research. The rationale behind that, we all know, but it's useful to recall that. The polar regions have been globally poorly observed, and especially when it deals with long terms, I mean decades, monitoring and observations. And there are very few on that length of time. We know that the variability of polar systems and polar climate especially occurs at all time scales, from year to almost inferior to decades or centennial. And it is on those time scales that we need to monitor what's happening to polar regions to understand the mechanisms and be able to eventually have forecast of how that could evolve. We all know that these regions are highly vulnerable. This is especially why we're all here today. And therefore, maintaining the long-term observation systems, maintaining the monitoring is key for assessing the risks, guiding action, and transfer from actually research and observation to action. And of course, collecting the observations on polar social ecosystems, I think we'll be dealing with that subject also this morning, is actually essential for building long-term commitment of all stakeholders around what is needed in polar and cryosphere regions. A few examples of how long-term monitoring actually gives us real keys on what is happening in cryosphere regions. You have here, for example, 25 years of temperature observations. It is the longest time series across the Southern Ocean, between 100 meters and in the upper part of the Southern Ocean regions. And you can see, of course, that something that we all know now, which is that the temperature of that Southern Ocean is actually increasing. But we know that because we have those 25 years of continuous monitoring. And if you look at inter-annual variations, for example, you have the demonstration that you need those 25 years to actually overpass the squature of inter-annual variations to actually have a global assessment on the long term. You can, of course, have the same conclusion on long-term ecosystem monitoring. If you look at the connection of biodiversity, for example, and the constraints on the environment of the living species, you can actually derive very important information of how biosphere and cryosphere do interact. And again, if you look at the right-hand side bottom, which is a comparison of the amount of penguins on the sea shelf compared to the extent of that sea shelf, you can see that the individual bars in each region vary quite a lot from year to year, but that you have a strong tendency on the long term if you look sufficiently long. We know, of course, that monitoring is key through the co-production of knowledge and the co-production of observations. This is also one thing that we have to consider, how we co-construct the monitoring systems with indigenous and local populations to actually monitor, of course, the human system changes, but also monitor how you can adapt to these changes. And the socio-ecosystems in polar regions are, of course, under particular stress, and the mitigation and adaptation strategies can much more easily be built together if it starts through co-construction of the needed observation. So I've got only 2 slides now to finish, which is in which directions should we all go together on those monitoring elements to actually do better. Of course, we have to maintain the environmental monitoring at key locations, specific locations that are at risk or that are of particular interest to assess the mechanisms which are at stakes in polar regions. And we need to do that both at the poles, but also in the subarctic and subantarctic regions. This is something that we'll be talking about together probably at length in a few minutes, but there are places, and I'm thinking about Russian Arctic, for example, in which we have almost no information for ages. We have to enhance the geographic and parameter coverage. We don't look enough at enough places in the Arctic and Antarctic regions. And we have to do that by promoting the sustained observation, especially of the key essential variables, to be able to share those observations between ocean, atmosphere, land, etc. Most important is that we build observations and observatories which more and more need to be multidisciplinary in the approach, in the conception of the observation systems. We have to co-locate the observation systems that do exist already, and each time we are building a new series or a new observatory, as much as possible, we have to bring it on a multidisciplinary approach from the beginning. And of course, as much as possible, we need to optimize the observation effort through coordinated fieldworks. All this is done essentially through scientific institutions right now. And I think we must entrust the scientific institutions to actually conceive those observatories, to lead those observatories on the long time necessary, and to cure the monitoring systems. So one key element on that slide is entrust the scientific organizations and the scientific institutions to actually build, lead, conceive, and run on the long time these observatories. The second element is that those observatories existing, we have to support the polar observatories from both ends. Because observation needs infrastructures, you do not construct long-term observing systems without having the ground to actually use them and insure them for the long time. And the key to that are the field infrastructures. They can be in large infrastructures, such as the French and Italian and Australian base in Antarctica or the Arctic, or it can be smaller, but we need to ensure those long-term infrastructures for research. The other end on which we have to put some effort is the production and the sharing of high-quality, qualified data. This means that to be useful, these observations must be qualified, they must be, as we said, acquired on a long time, but they must be shared. They must be open to everyone needing them. Those observation data must be open from the beginning with no restriction at all. And of course, they must be accessible on the sharing principles that are now well known on the principle of open science and shared data. Finally, and I will end with that, we have to optimize the use and the impact of polar infrastructures, because we have to promote a model for the shared good practices in those observatories and infrastructures, and we need to invest definitively in a reduced environmental impact of these infrastructures. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We heard now a lot about infrastructure, scientific operations. Now we are going to solutions, or possible solutions. And our next speaker is John Moore. John is Chief Scientist at the University of the Arctic Climate Action Program and Research Professor at the Arctic Center of the University of Lapland. He's member of the Finnish Academy of Science and Letters. His research activities encompass climate engineering, sea level change, ice sheet dynamics, social, natural, and indigenous Western co-design and targeted intervention to conserve the cryosphere. John, I'm looking forward.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to talk about this publication. I have about 10 or so. You're welcome to have a look at. This is just the summary. There's also a 200-page compendium that it's based upon. So we kind of informally call this 61 crazy ideas, but we should never repeat that. And just to use this infographic to run through just a few examples of these 61 proposed interventions. So they range from the land, and examples include rewilding, direct air capture, obviously carbon capture and storage, but also into the oceans and into the atmosphere in the shape of both marine cloud brightening and targeted stratospheric interventions. So what we did was try to look at these in a range of 12 different dimensions, and those include scalability, technical readiness, reversibility. It's very important, of course. You don't want to do anything that commits you down a path that you might regret later. And particularly when it comes to the high latitudes, it's very important to consider the impact on the local communities. Do they enhance the traditional ways of life or the things that they value, or do they make them more difficult to achieve in the future? So those are the dimensions, and we just graded them very simply, basically good, neutral, or bad. And you can see that the range is very high, and the amount of information available varies considerably. Some of them are just a few blog posts, and some of them have an extensive body of research behind them. I think that some of the key findings, of course, relate to the indigenous communities that are there. The Arctic is not an empty space. The initial assessment clearly shows that a lot of land-based solutions, if you like, the traditional options, are pretty good, except when it comes to timeliness. And this is a key thing. If we are going to deal with the issues of the tipping points that are likely to occur when temperatures cross the 1.5 degree threshold, then we need to find solutions that act relatively quickly. And this is particularly so in the case of the ice sheets, where there is essentially the IPCC conclude no probability of maintaining temperatures below 1.5 degrees. And that point, when the tipping point passed, the ice sheet no longer cares what the mitigation targets are. They are doing their own thing. But for the other stuff, like the permafrost and sea ice, of course, mitigation is extremely important. And it's very clear that most of these interventions lack any kind of research depth, especially when it comes to the communities. And that we need to invest significantly in how those might be, and particularly bringing in the Inuit Circumpolar Council and Sami Council, for example, who are partnering us in this phase 2. So I think also we haven't heard very much in this meeting about the role of civil society. This is a main shopping center in Finland and in Helsinki, and the youth NGO called Operatio Artis rented the billboard outside this shopping center for 2 weeks with this slogan, because they are very concerned about how to make some backup plan. If mitigation, and we've had 30 years of doing mitigation, has failed to prevent the approach perilously close to these tipping points, we need an alternative. And in this slide here, you can see it was a very popular event. They filled the largest cinema in Helsinki. We engaged with the indigenous communities, for example, who have been very critical in the past of some intervention research because it was not done in a way that involved these communities from the get-go. The person on the right of your screen, Annie Pokela, gave an absolutely amazing talk where she was talking from the youth angle, that they don't want to have to deal with unavoidable damage. We want every option on the table to be explored. And some of them, of course, are going to be bad, some of them are going to be ugly, and some of them might turn out to be a little bit beneficial in the long run. But we need to do more research on that to really find out. And at the moment, the amount of research funding is limited to the participation of the philanthropic community, by and large. States find it extremely difficult to give any kind of research on this. And you have to look at it in a holistic way, including, of course, the social license, the laws, the governance, and the economics. And the key thing is that you need to search for off-ramps and red flags as you go through this, and each of these different elements can feed back on the others. No one wants to go into this kind of an intervention in a panicked way. We need to be as well prepared as possible before anyone takes any unilateral action. And that's that. Thank you.
Thank you, John, also for sticking perfectly to the time. And it's my great pleasure now to, welcome Sonam Wangchuk as our last speaker. Sonam comes from far away. He's from the Himalayan Institute of Alternatives in Ladakh, India. He's an engineer, innovator, and education reformist. He's the founding director of the Students' Educational and Cultural Movement in Ladakh. He's also known for designing the Sekmol campus that runs on solar energy and uses no fossil fuels for cooking, lighting, and heating. Sonam has has developed the ice stupa technique that creates artificial glaciers used for storing winter water in the form, and they have a form of a cone-shaped ice head. I'm really looking forward to hear what it is, Sonam. So it's your duty. It's your turn.
Thank you. Thank you. And good morning, everyone. Let me first share with you a little bit about where I come from. Is it there? Yes. So if you don't know, Ladakh is in the top north of India, bordering China and Pakistan. We're across the Himalayas, not in the Himalayas, but trans-Himalayas, and it's a world of difference. Trans-Himalayas is not like Kashmir or Shimla, but rather dry, like another planet. If I open my windows in the morning, it looks more like Mars or Moon. But this, by the way, is a picture of the moon, Mars, just to wake you up. It's little like this, not exactly. So this is what it looks like outside my window. And at 3,500 meters, where my house is, and people live at 4,300 meters, it's more like outer space than planet Earth. You can see it from the temperature swings that we have. And people have gone beyond those mountains to tap glacial meltwaters to make life possible. And despite all these harsh realities, people have not only survived, but a colorful civilization has thrived with its own language, literature, music, dance, and life in tune with nature. Now, this part of the planet is often called the third pole on the Tibetan plateau where we are. A lot of glaciers after the north and the south. The biggest freshwater reservoir, some 50,000 glaciers. And in this one picture that I took from the aircraft as I flew out, you can see roughly 10 glaciers in this one frame. So that's how important this part is. But with the current global warming, our glaciers are melting away very fast, causing, of course, droughts, but more than droughts, flash floods. So they are not going away quietly. This is one of the glaciers that I've been observing for many years. It used to be a towering, majestic glacier across the road called Drangdung Glacier. Today, it's a shadow of itself in just 20 years. And they are not going away silently. They leave torrents behind them in summers when they melt very fast in the heat and form lakes, or even without lakes, they melt so fast on a summer hot day that can cause flash floods. So we get flash floods from quick melting glaciers, glacial lake outbursts, cloud bursts now as monsoon clouds are able to cross the Himalayas, unlike in the past. So this is one village where I went as a volunteer in 2006 when we had a big flash flood. Lots of damage to property, houses washed away. And while helping people, I asked an old man, the oldest I could find, when did you see the last such flood? And he said, I don't remember. I have only heard stories. He was in his 80s. The next after 2006 was 2010, when a quarter of the Leh city was washed away and some 1,000 people were lost. The next was 2013. The next was 2017. So this is what is happening up there in the Himalayas, high Himalayas. And I wanted to bring this message to you all. Now, we are not sitting hand on hand there. We try our best to do things, deal with things. Personally, I've been involved with initiatives, interventions to solve the problems of the mountains, from mitigation through solar heated buildings that stay plus 20 in minus 20 winters of Ladakh using natural materials like earth. And this school, where we do all such interventions, we have come up with various solutions. apart from the cold winters, the water solutions. Some 10 years ago, together with my students, we saw that our glaciers are melting away fast, but can we refreeze them? Can we make our own glaciers? People laughed because in winter, we wanted to refreeze the melting glacier water when nobody needs it for farming and keep it till summer. How can ice from winter last till summer? So we used some high school geometry and made cone-shaped ice structures using nothing but gravity as a resource for running what would otherwise need heavy pumps of lifting, many stories up the water to freeze in giant cones of 30, 40 meters. So this is typically what the landscape is. You always have an upstream and a downstream, which means you could put a pipe upstream and bring it down where water needs to be stored, and water maintains its level. So there'll be pressure in the pipe without any pump or moving part, fuel or pollution or power bills. You get a big fountain gushing, and this sprays the water into the -20 air, where it loses its latent heat and falls down and freezes naturally in a conical shape. Now the shape, this geometric shape, has a beauty. Like spheres and hemispheres, it has low surface area for the volume. Farmers need volume. Sun needs surface area, so you don't give it, and therefore it lasts till summer. And slowly melts in the summer heat, releasing water as people want. People have built cascades of them in valleys. You can see the tiny person in the middle stream to know the scale. They can be up to 12 stories, storing roughly 12 to or more millions of liters of water in winter that lasts till summer. And it has been done in Ladakh, neighboring Pakistan, Nepal, and in Switzerland, in the Alps, and now Chile in the Andes. Now, we wanted to look at whether this can be also scaled up to take care of glacial lakes that are dangerous. Can we turn them into opportunities? Can we siphon them out to lower their level so that the risk is less? And can we refreeze them into these storage systems? And we did a prototype in 2016 in Sikkim on a lake that recently burst and caused a lot of damage, you may have heard in the news. So in 2016, together with the Sikkimese Department of Science and Technology, we did a joint expedition taking on yaks, not just people's belongings, but these. These were pipes for siphoning, a small prototype to test the concept. Yaks carrying these pipes, reaching the Lonak Lake at 17,200 feet, roughly 4 days of trek, and then we installed these pipes on the lake, floated them down. This is close to summertime, so there is a big overflow. In winter, this stops. And this siphon was to drain out the lake's water. This was just one set. There were to be some 10 sets to be finally installed. And yes, the pipes were siphoning out at 50 liters per second per pipeline, and there were 30 to be installed, but unfortunately it seems the prototype was done and scaling up couldn't be done because of perhaps funding issues and so on. You can see here, water gushes out of the lake throughout the winter, and this can then be related to the previous solution. You make ice stupas from this gushing water by using the pressure in it and spraying it, exposing it to the ambient temperatures, and getting these ice sheets or ice cones that would slowly melt in spring when actually people need water, and keeps the lake ready to receive summer melt again, thereby turning them into an opportunity. We've been doing some simulations in the high altitude valleys in Ladakh, but it has to be done on scale. From there, we have wondered, and I would like to present it here. It's a bit stretched, far-fetched maybe, but such measures are needed. Can we dare to think of refreezing the polar ice or thickening the ice sheet, as was mentioned? Because the resources you need are already there in nature. To freeze, you need cold. Cold is the resource, and you have already minus 50, minus 60 temperatures there. The problem is that ice makes its own insulating sheet and doesn't let the water freeze. So all you need is a pump that pumps 3, 4, or 10 meters above the ice sheet and exposes the water to the ambient. And for that also the resource is right there. You have a good temperature difference of some minus 60 to near zero in the sea. And that could run Stirling engines, like heat pumps. Stirling engines are run on temperature differences, but it need not be an engine. You can think of an elegant giant jellyfish that moves in the sea from the temperature difference and pushes water up on the sea ice and lets it expose and therefore freeze. And the energy released in the freezing is actually radiated to outer space, thereby cooling it further. And of course, the albedo of bigger ice cap, I need not tell more about. Thank you very much. This is not the end.
Thank you. Even if I try to be strict with the time, we still have only 15 minutes left. So I will not ask any questions from my side, and I ask you now, do you have any questions to the speakers or any comments? Heidi, please.
Nicole, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for these absolutely fascinating talks. Love hearing about how low-tech can help us to save water resources. My question is for you, John. It's, of course, about geoengineering. We, of course, need to be aware of the negative consequences that geoengineering, such as solar radiation management, could cause to the climate. My question to you and everyone else is, actually, do we have a mechanism of governance to be able to either block or allow some of these so-called solutions? Thank you.
Yes, every choice has a risk. Every day that we decide not to do an intervention, that's a conscious decision. So you always, in the precautionary approach, try to weigh those two different risks, and you choose the best available given the knowledge, which is always imperfect. So in answer to your governance question, of course, there is no particular one, and that seems to be a problem. It's been known for 15 to 20 years, but policymakers and politicians are incredibly inert at trying to do anything compared with the rest of the stuff. And this is a big problem because no one wants to see some panicky, some unilateral approach, some rogue billionaire even trying to do this. So yeah, I don't know why it's so slow, but it really needs to be speeded up.
Is this on? Yeah. Okay. Just to follow up on that, I will share that at the National Science Foundation, we have recently, just in the last couple of months, released a Dear Colleague letter, which is basically an invitation to submit proposals specifically on studying the science, governance, and impacts of solar radiation modification and carbon dioxide removal. So it is very slow, but I think that the entities that facilitate these things are starting to make it possible.
Yes, thank you very much. And my question is also related to solar radiation modification. I think words matter. And in my view, we should not frame in the same way, with a benign term as intervention, two very different concepts. Removing CO2 from the atmosphere and storing it on the long term in safe and sustainable ways addresses the root cause of cryosphere loss and warming. Solar radiation modification does not address the root cause. It masks the symptoms, right? Temporarily. How do you call that in medicine when you don't cure a disease but mask the symptoms? It can have different names. In the IPCC report, I was very strong in having a serious assessment of solar radiation modification. And the way it is addressed in the synthesis report is very clear. These approaches, if implemented, introduce a widespread range of new risks to people and ecosystems, which are not well understood. Just think of aerosols and clouds interactions. In polar regions, there's a lot of new knowledge to be developed there. It could have residual or overcompensating climate effects. It does not address ocean acidification. And finally, the major issue is the lack of governance, as risks of deployment by a limited number of states would cause new international tensions. Since that report, there's new climate science knowledge. For instance, a paper by Bauer et al. 2023, looking at all pathways consistent with limiting warming close to 1.5 degrees Celsius, including solar radiation modification deployment. The effects would only be discernible after 20 years from natural variability, the same timescale as the effect of reducing emissions. And in these cases, the timescale of deployment would exceed 100 years, even under the most optimistic assumptions regarding climate response. So we are also talking about irreversibility. Last point, ethical questions. If solar radiation modification would be deployed at large scale, who would have a say? Would voices from small, high mountain or polar communities be heard compared with other very powerful interests? Who would pay for losses and damages resulting from solar radiation modification if currently we are completely unable to set up reasonable funding for losses and damages driven by fossil fuel emissions? Why is that research funding by billionaire philanthropies? And we know them, Open Philanthropy Foundation and others. They fund research, in particular in the Global South, on these matters. Why do they not fund open research questions with an agenda decided by scientists? We need to think very carefully about these ethical questions, the values, the power relationships, and it's a major responsibility on the scientific community on how we approach this. Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie. Are there any comments?
Yeah, well, of course, I would like to make a lot in response to that speech. I share all of your ethical considerations, for sure. I think we are in a situation very much like a patient who has been diagnosed with cancer after smoking for 30 years. What are they going to do? Are they just going to give up smoking at this point, or are they going to explore chemotherapy and surgery? No one's suggesting that those are good, fun things to do. But the point is, the risks of continuing down the emissions pathway that we have been on carry enormous risks into an unknown world, because once we go to 2 or 3 degrees warmer than the climate models have been trained on, we don't really understand what may happen. The ice sheets, with the marine ice sheet instability, will lead to the displacement of hundreds of millions of people. That will have huge impacts on the entire world, not just on those poor people in Bangladesh or the small island states. So again, you have to look at the risks of doing something compared with the risks of not doing something. And I completely agree there needs to be a massive increase in the funding, in the courage, especially for young scientists that feel intimidated because this kind of research is not normalized at the moment, but there's a moral duty to tell the general public all of the options that are available and the risks associated with them, and the society as a whole needs to come to a conclusion as to which direction they want to go.
Thank you. Here has been another question. This is not working. I think.
It will be, It's a question probably to Nicola. You've stressed the importance of monitoring for the cryosphere, and you stressed the importance of institutions, public institutions, to do that. We know that there are countries very healthy to do that, and I would say the Western world is able to do that. Sonam has shown us, how it has glacier survey in Ladakh. I mean, how can you go to a new level where really internationally speaking, we build this monitoring system with the right funding, including for those who don't really have the funding to do that?
Yeah, it's of course a very good question, Jerome. I think it's, again, it's a question of governance, and there are two items on which I would like to come back. One is, how do we build an institutional governance around those observatories? And I think that international actions like Future Earth, for example, the Belmont Forum, tend to finance projects which are interesting, and especially in the sense that they build a multicultural, usually, and transdisciplinary approach, but they are not long-term funded projects and observatories. And I think we all have to work together so that elements like the Belmont, the Future Earth, or other international agencies do take into account also the financing, maybe not of all infrastructures, but at least of the level of monitoring which is needed for the basic climate key variables, for example, the ocean climate variables, or the AVBs. We have to stick to those very simple variables. We have observatories at different scales that measure a lot of different elements, but we could, and it does exist, a series of parameters that we know should be measured everywhere, and we could stick to these ones to start with. The other governance element that seems to me very important is how we share the data. Because even if some less wealthy countries do not install and do not run observatories for a long time, they should be allowed to use the data wherever it comes from. And there are still a lot of limits on that, because it touches with sovereignty, touches with money, etc. And we really need to have an international act on the open data systems, and especially on the cryosphere. Those two government elements around the shared observatories on international grounds and on sharing the data, open data to every stakeholder, is very important. The last point I would like to stress is that we need to open our minds and our karmas to actually conceive and build the observatories with the stakeholders, and implied as much of the local stakeholders that are possible in the conception and the running of the observatories. Because all the observatories are not so expensive to run, especially if you rely on local knowledge and local grounds.
Thank you. Another question was here.
Yeah, Anil Misra from UNESCO. Sonam, thank you very much for a fascinating talk. Providing a local solution with citizen science engagement validation probably also provide short-term solutions. I was just wondering, and also picking up of the response on collecting these indigenous local knowledge in an open science platform, but whether it will solve in the long-term perspective when temperature 1.5 degree already overshooting, and in the high altitude that might be also, it might trigger. So probably this is a fantastic example of providing local solution for the adaptation, but whether it can continue when temperature is overshooting. Thank you.
Definitely, thank you. No, we don't think of our solutions as solutions even. The solution lies not in the mountains, it lies in New York, New Delhi, London, Beijing, where people live as if there's no tomorrow. So we always send the message, please live simply in the big cities so that we in the mountains can simply live. Meanwhile, while enhancing, where possible, the white cover of glaciers, we are now working on replacing it with green cover of vegetation, because we know in 30, 40 years we won't have that white cover. So if we help nature, nudge nature to vegetate our high altitude valleys, then maybe the big rains are absorbed, which now cause flash floods, will be absorbed and released slowly almost like what glaciers do. The beauty of glaciers is they stick in the mountains. The next best thing is vegetation, which can hold the water up and slowly release. So we are already working on that also, but by no means this is a solution, the white cup.
Thank you. We are running a little bit out of time, and there's one last question, and I'm asking for a very short answer and a short question.
It will be a very short question. If we can agree that CO2 emissions is essentially geoengineering, I would argue that we are geoengineering the climate already with the CO2 emissions that we're doing. If we have an exponential problem, incremental solutions are not the answer. And my question is, when we talk about engineering and geoengineering, they're used as opposites. But I think, is there a place for the scientific community to try and define the differences and where that scale goes? Because I'm not sure where it is, and I think it would be very helpful for politicians and the public to try and get some help in this defining. So my question to the panel is, how do we help define this?
Who wants to answer?
Well, I would say that one key thing is to talk to the people on the ground. The indigenous communities, they know best the key elements of the system that they need to keep. So yes, it's like sticking a sticking plaster on it, but if you're bleeding to death, a sticking plaster is very useful. It doesn't cover the whole thing, but it buys you a little bit of time to deal with things more gracefully.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we have to stop here because two of our speakers have to go in another session now. I thank all of you for the very interesting talks you have given, and I thank the audience for the interesting questions and for the attendance. So